Hi, everybody. Um, Happy holiday or holiday weekend or whenever it is that you're watching this. My name is Betsy, and I go by Betsalina Stitches, both here and on Instagram. And this is a channel about cross stitch. Although lately you've been seeing a little bit of knitting, but I certainly don't have as many knitting or crochet projects as I do cross stitch. So um, feel free to look at the chapter headings and look at the things you'd like to watch and skip the things you don't want to watch. Or, if you're here for the whole shebang, welcome. Um, Happy to have you here. So, um, I think I'll start off with a little bit of shout outs. I am still not watching a ton of Flosstube these days. Um, but I have started getting a little bit more able to do that. Um, Watched a little of Michelle Bendy Stitchy, and she is really like on her end of year, like, let's see how many things I can finish out of my current whips uh, mode, which I always appreciate. Um, and so she was fun to watch. She's also started working on the what is it called? Um, the Night Garden series, where she has one pattern, but a bunch of different designers during Nashville Market put out designs that all use the same four Dinky Dyes threads. And I also have a big piece that I'm putting several of those on. So nice to see Michelle making some progress because I'm not making progress. Um, but um, and I've watched Envis, who always has interesting and different projects and the kinds of things I often see on Flosstube. So that's always fun. I think the last one I watched was like in October, spooky. Plus, she really enjoys sprouting lupine, and so it's always good to see her progress on those, or their progress. And then Thick Threads, Eli, I caught up with one of his videos recently, and that was cool. He likes to do interesting finishes. So there was one finish that was turning a piece, I think it was a round robin with other stitchers, into a project bag. So I always enjoy seeing that kind of thing. Um, and my weekly video people I'm totally not caught up with, but I have watched a little bit of the Runner Stitcher, and a little bit of um, Crafty Gaming Jamie, and a recent episode of the Sunshine Stitchers. Um, so they post weekly, so I definitely haven't seen all the videos, but it's nice to see their faces um, on my screen a little bit lately. Um, just, generally good vibes. So if you want relaxing, fun people to watch, those are good. Good watches. Um, and I think that's it. Like last time, work has been really busy. Um, we're going through just like a lot of transition. So um, trying to make time to do the things I like to do, but also just not stress myself out by anything else that feels like I have to do it. So that's shout outs. And next we'll go to cross stitch. So I'll start with finishes. I have, I think, four, three finishes and two starts and finishes, so five total. Um, and then I have some whips. Um, so I'm filming this on American Thanksgiving. We don't really celebrate other than we usually try to do something that's like watching native creators or something that is sort of um, focused on you know native people as opposed to the like uh, not accurate historical representation of what happened when the British came to the Americas. So yeah, just been watching a little bit of like native TikTok, and last night I started watching Mohawk Girls, which is so far it just seems like young women who live on the Mohawk Reservation, and I believe it's near Montreal, if I'm not mistaken. I've only watched the first episode, but it's like very silly, fun comedy, like young girls dating kind of thing. So I'll probably watch a little more of that. But yeah, I just realized that I put one of my finishes somewhere else. So I will pause this after introductions and I'll come back and you'll see me with my finishes. Right back. Okay, so I'm back. The first thing that I finished is something I started back in January to practice beading. So this is a Mill Hill uh, pink flower kit. Um, and you can kind of see, I hope, that this is one of the ones where every stitch has a bead, so there are no colored threads. It's all white thread, and then the beads are in each stitch. Um, so I was very close to a finish on this, and then it's on like a lavender perforated paper that came with the kits. Um, I'm not sure what the count is. It might be 16 count. Um, but yeah, basically just using everything from the kit. I haven't like cut it out or turned it into anything yet, but it was definitely like a good practice of my use of beading. I feel like I could still um, learn a lot more about how to do beading when it's in addition to cross stitch. Um, I'll show you my second finish since we last saw each other is the Christmas pickle. And I think maybe I had shown this. Um, Maybe I had shown this. Sorry, trying to get a better light here. Um, the last video, I think I had shown this, but I hadn't done any of the beads or the sequins. Um, and I did watch a few like videos about how to attach the because these have some of them are just beads and I think the beads look okay, but I'm not sure, there might have been a better way to do it. And then some of them are a sequin with a bead on top, and I just don't know if I did what I was supposed to on those. So you can see they just feel a little messy to me. But it's always good to try something new. So this is Christmas Pickle by Satsuma Street, and this is part of the the Jingle Ball Baubles book from last year's Jingle Ball. And then it's on a 16, I think, count white Ada, um, using DNC and some random green beads and sequins that I bought from Amazon. Um, and yeah, the threads are two over one, or one Ada square. So that is that one. And then the next thing I finished was my last 2023 start that was still a whip. This is actually not cross stitch, it's embroidery, but this is my black cat in a pot embroidery kit. This was something when I was first coming back to cross stitch where uh, when I bought this, I thought it was cross stitch. I just heard on Sunshine Stitchers that that happened to Sheila recently, so I don't feel so bad. She's been stitching a lot longer than I had at the time, but so I just figured I'd start it. I think I might have gotten this even like before I started my first cross stitch after however many years. Um, so I finally finished it, and I think it looks good. It's always like I feel like there's a different way of like the way that I judge my cross stitch is sometimes like how neat does it look, but then like embroidery is much more like drawing or sketching. Like there's not like an exact way that you do each stitch, or there is, but like which uh, point on the fabric that you put the needle in and out is. Um, so yeah, I don't feel the same like satisfaction of completing something the way it was meant to be completed with embroidery. Um, but it is enjoyable for sure. So that's that one. And that one I started December 4th, 2023. Um, so that and the pink flower were sort of like um, definitely older things, whereas all of my other things are ornaments that I started this year. So the Christmas pickle I started in October. And then the two ornaments that were called for um, November ended up also being finishes. So the first one is by Brooke's Books. Um, and I don't know how many of you are familiar with Brooke's Books, but the designer passed away. I want to say it was this year, maybe last year. Um, but I had set aside, she had a lot of free patterns on her website, and I'm not sure if she still does, but um, I had set aside and downloaded the Advent Animals, and this is the first one. It's called Kitty Kitty. So there's 25 of them, and she is so cute and also just like so fancy. Like that little shawl she's wearing, and um, yeah, she's just looking very fancy and ready for a holiday party and carrying a fish cookie. Um, so that was really fun. Um, and so Katie Kitty by Brooks Books, and this is, I believe, a 16 count navy Ada. Um, and I did the stitches are 2/2, um, or sorry, 2/1 Ada square. Um, and then there's a little back stitch as well. And I think the frame it's had to do in 3 strands. So that gives it like a little bit more dimension. Um, but yeah, this was fun. it definitely made me wish I had done some other designs by her before she passed away, um, because um, yeah, it would have just been nice to appreciate her while she was alive. And I also don't know, I haven't gone and looked again, but I know there was some concern about her patterns not being available anymore, which, makes sense if family isn't able to keep up with the website and all of those things. So it's always a little like you don't know what's going to happen when a designer passes away. It could be that um, their family um, really takes on the aspect of their business that is making sure stitchers can still get their patterns, and sometimes they just can't. And that's, I mean, it totally makes sense, but it's always a little sad when that happens. So I know um, some of this a lot of stitchers knew Sage from Night Spirit Studio, who also recently passed. So um, yeah, just kind of thinking about like I'm so grateful for the like art that they left in the world. Um, and also it's just like a little bit melancholy to think about people's art that is very beloved and like what will happen to it in the future. Um, I think right now Sage's partner is um, has a lot of help working on like maintaining the things on Sage's website and all of that right now. But definitely, if you feel like supporting him, you can still, I think, sign up for Patreon and kick a few dollars towards them. And definitely go look at patterns. I know like it's much easier if you buy PDF patterns because those are sort of like set up on an automatic thing. And then I'm not really sure if they had physical patterns in stores, but I think you could. I am not sure if you can buy physical patterns from them individually. They might be in stores. Um, so yeah, that was a little tangent, but and then my second finish that I started also in November, so start and finish, is I think I got this from Crossroads Globe's Christmas Freebies episode, but this is Happy Christmas to All by Shepherd's Bush. And this was fun. It was an interesting experience for me because it said to use 32 count but only use one strand, and I assume that's like just the more primitive style. So I went with it and I think it turned out good. It's definitely like not the same like plump stitches that I'm used to with the 2/2, um, but it totally fits this design. And I did a color conversion on this. I used some of the called for weeks dye works that I just happened to have, but I also used, I think it was Classic Colorworks Roasted Chestnut for the brown, um, and uh, Red Manor for the house, and then Pea Pod is like the darker yellowy green. And then I think I switched out. There was a different color for the yellowy green, the lighter one that I switched out for different weeks. Um, and then the more like purpley red is a Gentle Arts red currant. So that was kind of fun. And it has a few little beads on it. Again, I never know if I'm like attaching them exactly how the designer would suggest, but I think they look pretty good. There's only like 7 of them, the little holly berries. But yeah, so those are my finishes. This is again one of those possibly 32 count even weave from Mystics Fabrics, just because I got a bit bag, so it just came with a lot of pieces of fabric about the size that are even weave. And like I said, this is 1/2. Um, so that's that one. I didn't have any starts, so weren't also finishes. So the remaining things I have are works in progress or whips. Um, and yeah, so I had one, two, three, four, five cross stitch whips in this time frame. Um, I this was called Cross Stitch Monopoly, and obviously I'm way behind, but this is my temperature cross stitch. Uh, the Night Sky by Climbing Goat Designs, and super fun, but again, like so many like color changes and switching from one thread for backstitch to two threads for cross stitch or half cross stitch. So it's taking me a while, but I'm definitely, I think, into June now, or maybe just May. I could tell you. Um, oh, most of June. So I guess that makes sense because it's not quite halfway around the globe. But I still have like another week of June to do. And then, of course, like everything else in the year that hasn't happened yet. So I noticed that when I do this and I'm using Pattern Keeper, I'm only marking off cross stitches and half stitches, but not any of the back stitching. Um, and so, unlike other projects where I sit down and I could like easily do 200, 300 stitches, for this one, usually by the time I'm like, okay, I need to set this down, I only have less than 100 stitches in any one sitting. But I've put that on my list for Stitchalongs in my Notion just to remind me that it's another thing that like sort of has a deadline, but like, and I'm not cut up. So um, I have that ongoing. And then the the next thing that I worked on in November, although this was only at the beginning of November, um, is Extraordinary Birds. So this is on the called for Sandbar by BB Stitch Me, and mine is 36 count. And I just started working on I think this one was called Big Noses or something, or Big Beaks. So I just put in the toucan, and then there's a bird with a really big beak over here that I haven't started yet. So made a little progress on that. I think if you watched my screen share of Notion, I had finished this bird by the time I did the screen share recording. And so I said something like, there's 948 stitches left. But then on the screen, it said 700 something. So that was why. But yeah, so that's that one. I'm using DMC 2/2, just like pretty much all the called for, except obviously I made the decision to go with 36 count. Um, and yeah, just trying to make a little progress every month on this. Um, and we'll see how far I get. There's still like all of the decisions to make about how I will fully finish ornaments and which ones I'm going to fully finish and who they're going to go to. So we'll see where that ends up. Um, but okay, so the next uh, the next thing I worked on as a whip was, um, again, not a huge amount of progress, but I did work a little bit more on Halloween at Hawkrun Hollow. So it looks like I've completed the full border, but actually the bottom row is not completely, like some of those are only half of the cross. But I did at least get all the way around, and um, I think I was like a half of stitch off or something, and then it just fudged it. But yeah, so just a tiny bit of progress. This is the first block one in Halloween at Hawkrun Hollow, and I'm doing it on Not Another Sampler by the Stitch Me, and this is a 40 count per doll, so an even weave instead of linen. Um, and yeah, I just keep plugging away at that. I have no plans for that to be finished at any particular time, but I do like it, so I wanted to get it started this year. Um, and then the next thing I worked on was, oh, and I'm doing one thread over two threads on Halloween at Hawkrun Hollow. I also worked, I want to say like 1 or 2 days on this Labrador puppy by Jenny Barton. And this is from a Just Cross Stitch magazine, or no, Cross Stitch Gold Animals is the name of the magazine. Um, and so I've just been trying to get a little more progress on the dog. This is it's a Labrador puppy in a field. Um, and so just trying to like chug along anytime it comes up at Cross Stitch Monopoly or I get the urge. But I haven't made a whole lot of progress on it. It's almost full coverage, so it's I think the only thing that's not full coverage is you can see there's these very light clouds, and behind that the white isn't stitched. But yeah, and this is I believe it's a 28 count white, and it's called Alma cloth. So it's I don't think it's linen, but it's like a similar thing to linen in that there's like slubs and it's not always perfectly even, but it's pretty even. Um, and I just went with the colors that they suggested because there's a lot of like in order to create dimension, there's certain things that are one thread and other things are two threads, and there's like half stitches and full stitches, and so I just didn't want to have to worry about that looking weird because it wasn't the same count as the pattern set. So that's that one. Um, and then the last thing, which I might need notes for because I realized I didn't tell you anything about the people last time. Um, Stitch for Pride. So, um, what it's looking like right now. So I'm not quite done with November, but it's that like pinky variegated next to the chrysalis, in between the chrysalis and um, the pipe, the smoke skull. Um, so just totally loving how this looks as a unit and also the individual pieces. Um, I'm assuming December is going to go in that big blank spot in the middle. Um, so yeah. Um, so to talk about the people I didn't talk about last time, um, I know that Um, this one represents the butterfly and the chrysalis. Represents Lily Elba, who was an artist when they were a painter when they were presenting as a man. Later, they gave it up um, as something that sort of went with their previous identity and didn't fit them anymore. Um, but they were um, I kind of just want to bring up my notes to make sure that I'm not misrepresenting them. But Lily Elba was um, one of the first people to ever, or potentially the first person to do gender affirming surgery. Um, and she actually did several surgeries. Um, and I believe it was in Germany. Um, this is why I need my notes. Let me grab this. Um, and then I'm not sure, I haven't seen it, but the movie The Danish Girl is loosely based on her and her wife's lives. But it's not like there are definitely factual errors, so it's considered like a fictionalization that uses her story as inspiration. There are definitely like some parts that are um, true. So the readings for this were super interesting. So her wife was Gerda Gottlieb, and they're both Danish painters. Um, and so her story is that the way that the gender identity shift happened was that Einar was their male name, was living as a male painter and happily, well, I don't know if happily, but married, and sort of part of the art scene, and so was their wife. And excuse me on the pronouns; they sort of changed in all of the things that we read as well, um, because they lived in as a male presenting person for um, maybe half of their life, and then as a female presenting person in the second half. So there was the story that uh, their wife had a person who normally did sat for paintings. A lot of her paintings were portraits, and they couldn't show up, and they needed to like finish. I know part of it was her legs in the portrait, um, and the model couldn't come for whatever reason, and said, "Oh, why don't you have Einar sit for you? They can just like pretend that they're my legs, but they're not my legs." And so um, there's this whole discussion of like, will you like dress up enough that I can continue finishing my painting using your body? Um, and then um, it was sort of like a, I'm not sure I want to do this, but then once they did, they really enjoyed the way that they felt in um, in that presentation. And then there were you know uh, sort of a like um, an ongoing transition that happened from that point. So um, they went to some parties and things, dressed as Lily, um, who I think initially was sort of, they talked about her as a character, um, that Einar was playing. And, the longer that Einar presented as Lily, the more that they wanted to be seen as Lily. Um, and so eventually were only called Lily, and they um, they traveled to undergo sexual reassignment surgery in 1930. So this is the time period where there was research and things happening around transgender medical, gender affirming care kinds of things. But later, a lot of that information was destroyed during the Nazi um, time frame. So um, there was this doctor that was doing, some of the like first research into this kind of surgery, and at a point, Lily really wanted to feel that they were physically female, and so underwent a series of surgeries, and um, unfortunately, the last one, she got some kind of infection or something, and ended up passing away. So, and I want to say that was maybe, oh, okay, her death was in 31. No, yes, her death was in 1931. And so there's more information about her available because she's a more recent figure than some of these other people, but also the medical records were destroyed. So um, there was a really interesting contemporary opera that was part of the learnings for that month, and I we just watched it recently, and it was a whole opera about Lily and Gerda, and um, it was really fascinating because it was definitely like an opera, not a rock opera, but like opera style. Um, and then, but about this, like, which is a not really contemporary subject as we're learning from all of the trans history, but a topic that I wouldn't have imagined seeing in an opera in this way, where there's a lot more discussion about their relationship and her interactions with family around the change of um, identity and presentation. And we see some things that are sort of gender non-conforming, like um, women who decide they're going to pose as male, like Mulan, to be in the army or things like that. Um, but it's not in the same way. So just very interesting. Again, this is a person who like had a considerable amount of money, and so um, definitely like that colors their experience of uh, existing in a trans body in this time period. But and then also I think just like being in the art scene versus other sort of parts of society may have also contributed to her ability to uh, really do this. But very interesting, and at some point sad. I would like to see the Danish Girl, but there is definitely like some criticism about it not actually representing exactly what her story was, and and also of them casting a cis man um, as her character when there are other like there are trans actresses that could play this person. So, um, but and even the actor has said after the fact, like, oh, this might have been better if it was actually like a trans actress as opposed to me pretending to be trans. Um, so that was this September Butterfly and Chrysalis one. And then October is this pipe with the smoke and the skull coming out of it. And this is another really interesting story. This is representative of Pipash Pishta. I think I'm saying that correctly. Um, but Pipash Pista is kind of like translatable to pipe smoking Steve. Sometimes in English, there it will say pipe smoking Pete because it's alliterative, but really it translates to like the version of what would be Stephen. Um, and um, this story is interesting. This is a little earlier in the 19th century, born in 1886. Um, so, well, okay, so their adulthood is like in the 20th century, but early 20th century. And oh, sorry, I said Polish, but he's Hungarian. And so this story, there's just a lot of conversation around um, sort of what the experience of people in rural Hungary was during the First World War. And really the idea that when a lot of the men went away to war, um, women uh, took on a lot more control and perhaps realized at some point that like their marriage was set up in a way that they didn't like, and they liked having more control over their farms and what they did with their lives and things like that. And so there were a lot of what was reported as suicides of men after they returned. Although the historical record seems to suggest that many of those were not suicides because of PTSD from the war or anything, but more often than not, the woman having the husband killed or killing him, poisoning him, whatever. Um, and so Pipash Pista was uh, assigned female at birth, um, and was married to, I believe, a much older man. And I think that was also very common to be for these men coming home from war to have been married to someone much much younger than them. So that was also part of this. Um, and After Bishbisa left their husband, um, they began working as a day laborer. Like they did a lot of things that were considered sort of outside of traditional gender roles, pipe smoking and being a day laborer, and so they began dressing in a way that was more um, considered more masculine at the time, and there's some suggestion that part of this might have just been that it was easier to get work if you were perceived to be male. And then there's also some parts of the story that suggest that they just sort of in general didn't conform, so sometimes they would wear a skirt, but then on top like a masculine shirt and jacket, um, and again with the pipe smoking and the like doing. I mean, I'm expecting that a lot of people did day labor kind of work um, in this time period because, like I said, there were a lot of men who were sent to war, and this was in a rural, like farming Hungarian town. Um, and so at some point, there was um, someone that they worked for that was one of these wives that wanted her husband killed and somehow asked Pipash Pisa to be involved in that. And the story of the crime is like um, that they strangled him with a rope, but then hung him up somewhere so it would look like a, a suicide. And I believe because these were reported by the wives as suicides, they think there were potentially like 30 other crimes. They weren't investigated in the same way that you might. So there wasn't like a ton of evidence to say that this was not a suicide. But at some point, there was a investigator who was speaking, or maybe it was like the there was someone who was there, like maybe they were the child of the wife that had their partner or husband killed. Um, and there was sort of like a folklorish aspect to it, like women would threaten their husbands, like don't cross me or I'll send Pisha after you. And I feel like that's still like this character exists in like Hungarian folklore as well as having been a real person. So um, at some point, like maybe a decade later, um, they were investigated and they were sentenced to, I think maybe first to death, and then later their sentence was commuted to life. Um, but they were very sick and ended up dying in prison. And um, I think this wasn't the only person that was doing this in rural Hungary at the time, and so there was some aspect of like we're not gonna try and get this person for all of these 30 murders because that just looks bad for the police and for like whatever in the area. So they'd only tried for these two cases, and they just sort of let the other 30 or whatever go. So just a very interesting story. Um, there's like stories about what it was like to be incarcerated as a person who presented as male but had female anatomy. Um, so there was some of the reading that was like supplemental was about like uh, trans women's experiences in prison in the U.S. and in other places. So yeah, just a really interesting story. It kind of a lot of the learnings felt more like sort of like true crime more than like historical. And I think some of that is also just like based on what is available. Um, and then um, and then there's a metal band in Hungary that has a song about Pipas Pisca. So again, I think this is like a thing that was sort of taken on as like a feminist um like like Pipesh Pisa was protecting these women who often had been like married much younger, like almost potentially as children, depending on what you say as a child. This is another thing like that happened with the Epstein thing recently, where people said, "Well, it's not really pedophilia because they were teenagers, but they're still like legally children." So again, people who now we would consider legally children who are married to much older men and then were being mistreated. And so there was like a rash of women fighting back by having their husbands murdered. So I'm not pro murder, just to put that out there. But there's some level of um, like of viewing this person as a hero to women who are being abused. And so there's a metal band in Hungary that has a song about her. I listened to it, but it's not in my language. So, you can tell that Pipash Pista is being said. But so yeah, just a really interesting figure who still has like a place in Hungarian folklore. Um, and yeah, so that was October. And then November, which I still have about 250 stitches on, is this sort of climbing vine flowers and things in between those two. And that is supposed to represent, or the person for November is Vita Sackville West, who was um, a, well, probably most well known, unfortunately, for the fact that she was a lover of Virginia Woolf. But this was a person who um, was again fairly well off. I think they lived in two different castles, and like one was the one that they were like raised in, and then later they ended up buying the castle that's called Sissinghurst. I'm not sure if it would actually be called a castle, but it has a tower and like ruins and gardens and um, etc. And then I think after her and her husband purchased it, found out that there was some like family connection way back in the day. So maybe it should have been passed down through generations. Um, but she was also very well known for she wrote novels and poems and a column about gardening. Um, and I think this was the way that this person was um, gender nonconforming sort of had to do with both their sexuality and their presentation. So um, the a lot of the learning really refers to her with female pronouns. But she was also the inspiration for uh, Virginia Woolf's Orlando, which is a novel. I actually just got it from the library on Libby, but I haven't started it yet. My understanding is that this the main character, as well as Vita, did some traveling dressed in masculine dress and some uh, time in their life in feminine dress. So, um, but it's clear that they had a lot of relationships with women, but they also married. I think his name is Harold Nicholson. Um, they married a man, and in some of the learnings, it makes the designation that they were both um, homosexual. Um, and in others, it says that they were both bi. So they did have two children. So definitely something happened between them at some point. But both had plenty of same sex partners, and they sort of had that agreement in their marriage. And um, a lot of uh, Vita's relationships were super like passionate and somewhat destructive, it sounds like. But also produced like a ton of like writings and just really interesting um, like conversations about her feelings and her relationships with these other women, and also how much she loved her husband, but more as a friend. It seemed like in a lot of ways, she definitely doesn't appear to have been super passionately like in love with many men. So yeah, it's just a interesting story. I think I still have maybe 250 stitches left to fill in this little part over here. Um, but yeah, super enjoying learning about her. And then I'm not sure if I heard about this from the Stitch for Pride trans history cell or if I just heard about it somewhere else. But I also started watching this show called Gentleman Jack, and it's about Ann Lister, who's a real person, um, who again was like a wealthy landowner in England and um, in Victorian times, I want to say. Um, and so it's based on her real life, but obviously it's fictionalized because it's like a drama series. Um, and so that has been really interesting because she's definitely very interested in men, but like, or sorry, she's very interested in women. But then, like, a lot of the women that she has relationships with end up being married to someone because in their time period and their status and whatever, like the only way that a woman can survive is to marry um, uh, sometimes a wealthy man or a man that can get access to her finances that she's inherited. Um, but but yeah, so far all I know is that she's in relationships with women, but they keep getting married off, and so that's a frustrating experience. And um, she comes across as like very much more like business oriented and um, able to take charge and doesn't dress in the like traditional like fancy feminine outfits. Um, so yeah, it's a historical drama, but I don't know that much about the original story. So yeah, that's our trans history for today's episode. Um, and yeah, so I think that's all of my cross stitch for today. Um, I do have a little bit of progress on some of my yarn crafts, and also I have some haul and some books. Um, so yeah, I'm gonna pause here and I will come back. Okay. So for yarn whips, I really just have the three things that I started um, in the last that I showed you I'd started in the last video. But I have made some progress on them. I I set aside both the chunky mermaid blanket where I ran out of the yarn, um, and I haven't done a lot on my 2% blanket. Um, Nothing since the last video, but I've just been focused on these knitting whips. So um, the first one is the deep winter coat. So I think the last time I had 4 or 5 inches from the armhole. Now maybe I have 8 or something. So I'm making progress, but I haven't gotten to the end of it. So this is the front of these beautiful cables. And then I think last time when on the um, thing I had found a miscrossed cable on the back, so I did go back and fix that. Um, so and I will have um, some photos of me wearing it just so you can see um, how far I am. Basically, you're supposed to do 15 inches from the armhole approximately. Um, I'm hoping that this goes a little over my butt when it's blocked. So, and that's kind of how it looks like in the pattern. So basically, it's like another maybe 7 inches of the pattern, um, and then some ribbing, and then I need to do the sleeves, which also have some really pretty cables in them, and um, and then there's like a shawl collar that goes around the neck and then down the middle of the cardigan. So that is that one. I still think that it's amazing. But I have been thinking about how I have all of these projects that are cross stitch, and and I just like I can't decide between cross stitch and knitting, so I feel like neither of them is getting as far as it would if I wasn't doing both, but that's okay. Um, and these are because I'm so new at knitting, all of my knitting projects are for myself. And so I need to like, make a list, figure out what I'm giving away, what I'm sending. Hopefully this year I can do a better job again like I did last year and send things out by like, the 15th or the 18th with plenty of time to get there. um but uh yeah, we'll see. So if that happens, then I normally have the last 2 weeks of the year off, so I'll have plenty of time to do things at the end of December. Um, and maybe I'll make more progress on this. Um, I know the winter solstice is the 21st or the 22nd of December. Um, and so there was a part of me that was like, oh, it'd be great to have this knit coat that is called the deep winter coat done by winter solstice, but I don't know. We'll see. Um, I have had a few knitting sessions recently, not on this one, but on the next one I'll show you, where I must have gotten distracted somewhere in the middle because I had to frog back or like fix something somewhere. Um, and so I think that makes it um, me a little more likely to focus on the cross stitch. Um, like I said before, work has been really stressful, so I don't need my crafting to also be stressful. Um, but yeah, and I'm almost through the third ball of yarn, and I think I might have bought like 7 or 9 balls of yarn, so I may have a lot left after. We'll see how much the sleeves and everything else take. Um, but I have been thinking about like, oh, maybe I could make a hood or something to go on it with the leftover. Because I do like a hood. I have been wondering if part of that is just like growing up in the Pacific Northwest. Like, if you don't have a hood, then you're always wet. Whereas here, there's a lot more times where it's like a little humid, but it's not raining. So although right now it's kind of cloudy outside. So yeah, this is called the Deep Winter Coat by Wool and Pine. I'm using Swish Bulky, and the color is Garnet Heather. Um, so a deep red that's sort of orangey and purpley in different lights. Um, but yeah, pretty pleased with that. Second thing I'm working on. Oh, and just before I go on to the second thing, this is also the Spite sweater, which folks that I follow on Discord and Twitch started, I want to say, like in the spring to try and see how many of them could do it faster than Ian of Ian's Crafts. So um, I'm not sure where he is right now, but I know he's not finished. So there's still a possibility I could finish before him. But then the next thing is also from a stitch along, or I'm sorry, a knit along with those people, um, or some of the same people. And this is the filigree triangle shawl by Julie Knits in Paris. And honestly, this is like a thing that if you had told me a few months ago, I would be knitting, I would have laughed because it looks super complicated, but it's not too bad. So it has this like I guess intarsia like cable in the middle that's two colors, and then the rest of it is all like um, different knit lace patterns and things. So I think part of the corners that I haven't gotten to is like going to be a leaf pattern, and then I think this row or this column is more like a tiara pattern. Um, yeah, it's been really fun to work on. This is definitely one where I missed something somewhere and I need to go back. But they've started also calling this the spite shawl because it's a similar sort of thing. And then I'm just turning it around to show you um, what the back looks like with those twisted cables. You know, it's not perfectly done, but it doesn't look too bad. Just because that was the thing that I wondered when I first saw it. Like, what do you do with the the yarn once it's twisted over and you need to keep going over that other color? So that's what it looks like. And I think there's 7 charts, and they all get wider and wider and wider because it's a triangle. And I just finished chart 2, so um, lots to go on that one. Uh, I think that there's one person, maybe it's Zakayla, who is through chart 4, but I think everyone else is like in a similar place to me, or like maybe a little bit further. Um, so working on that, and this is the yarn is called Nipix Gloss, and it's a fingering weight or like a sock weight, and the colors are called Blackberry for the dark purple and Gypsum for the sort of tan color. So that one is exciting. And then I didn't get very many stitches in because I was sort of just doing this if there was a meeting or something that I was sitting in at work. But I did get a couple more rows in my uh, pseudo palindrome socks that I'm doing two at a time. Um, and these are using a Lion brand sock yarn called Mani Petty, and this colorway is called yoga, and it's self-striping, so I'm using two balls of the same yarn, but obviously like the stripes are at different places, so um, they'll both have all the colors you're seeing here. And there's also like a gray color that you might have seen on my cup cozy. um, but yeah, so far I like doing two at a time. um, I think I stopped here because I was like, okay, this is probably enough ribbing, but then now I have to figure out what I'm doing with the leg. So um, yeah. So once I get back to those, um, that'll be good. Um, and again, this is sock weight yarn. This is this is like a wool and a nylon blend. The filigree triangle shawl is in a it's like a there's a silk and a wool and maybe nylon. And then the swish bulky is superwash merino. Um, so those are all my yarn whips. So I'm like still really enjoying it, but again, I'm sort of feeling like there's so many different things and feeling a little like I don't know if it's ADHD or what, but I just like I can't figure out what I should be focusing on right now. I have a tendency this time of year to start thinking about like what did I do all year and like what do I want to do next year? And so hopefully that'll help me with like um feeling a little bit more centered. Um I also uh, went from being like a supporting player to like actually doing the project management and like being the leader on some projects at work. And so that's made me like get a little bit more into like, okay, I need to have a plan for how I'm like keeping track of all of my tasks. And I started trying to use Notion in that way, since I'm always in Notion for cross stitch and crafts anyway. Um, so yeah, I guess I'm sort of feeling a little bit like maybe I'm going through like a little bit of a reset right now, which is nice when there's time off. Um, and yeah, so I think after this, um, let's see, what do I have to say about goals? I think my biggest goal for the next like week or two is to figure out what I'm planning to send and gift of my finished Christmas ornaments. Um, and like figure out how I'm going to finish them and then plan out like what I need to do to get them done by the time I want to send them. So that's like my biggest plan. And then otherwise, it's sort of just like making progress on all the things that I've told you I would like to make progress on. Like, I would like to get to the 50% of rose mark on the deep winter coat. Um, and then get to the 50% on Ars Robotica, although that might just get set aside until after I send out gifts. Um, and then I'm sort of like once I figure out what I'm FFOing and all of that, that's sort of like a different hobby than the actual stitching and knitting. So in my stitching time, I would like to uh, make progress on, well, finish the November stitch for Pride, probably this weekend. Like I said, it's only like 200 or so stitches left. Um, and then make progress on Extraordinary Birds. Um, and one of the December calls for Whipco is my Make It Murder Stitchalong. Um, and so that is like involves a different hobby, which is like designing, because my if you're not familiar, Cross Stitch the Globe did this Stitchalong that was called Make It Murder. And the idea came out from things that are like cozy, cute patterns, but then making it murdery in some way. So um, I know like one of the things that Stephanie from Cross Stitch the Globe did was she did a tiny town, but she made it like Fargo, the movie, I think, not the series. And so there was like a wood chipper and some other like elements, but mostly it was a tiny town pattern. And I'm doing something similar with some tiny towns, but I'm trying to make them like Twin Peaks. Um, and so like I have patterns that I can pull some like basic things from, but I need to like map out, do I want to have the main like points in the town that you see in Twin Peaks like in the right place for where they should be based on the story? Am I going to like have everything all on one street? I have three tiny towns. I think it's Frosty Town, Tiny Town, Any Tiny Town, and More Any Tiny Town. Um, so I know I want like there to be a diner for the diner, and I want there to be a big truck for um, I'm forgetting his name, but you know the guy with the big truck. Um, and then I'm trying to figure out like if I would have the mill or the hotel. I don't really have any. I guess I have one pattern that has waterfalls in it, but I don't have any like good falls for the actual falls in Twin Peaks. Um, and then yeah, there's like Ed's gas station. So I think one of the any tiny towns has something that would be easily made into a gas station. There's like the police station. There's like places in Twin Peaks that you see again and again. So I have to map all of that out before I can even start stitching. So that's definitely like a plan, but probably will be after I'm done sending things for the holidays because it's like just for me. Um, so um, and then the other thing that was called was Nostalgic Tarot by the Witchy Stitcher. So I have done one of the cards and I've started like a lot of the outlining on the frame. Um, but it would be good to start another card. Um, but yeah, it's like so many stitches that I'll just be happy if I make a little progress in my whip go days. So those are from the starts and whips board. Um, and then for the Christmas ornaments board, I have the calls were Holodinos by the Cozy DH, um, which is again another like freebie. I think it was a freebie from Cross Stitch the Globe's Christmas freebies video. Um, and so Christmas dinos. And then the other one is Christmas Wreath by Teresa Kogut. Um, and that was one of the patterns in the 2024 Jingle Ball Baubles book. Um, and then the the free square or the middle square didn't get called until the very end. So December also has that square, and so for that square, for the Christmas ornaments, it was just to finish um, the ornament that I made in the Jeanette Douglas class last year. I think it only needs like a few stitches to be finished. Maybe it's just like putting in the year or Noel or whatever. Like it's um, very few stitches, but so I'll be finishing that. I think I did all of the specialty stitches already. Um, and then the middle square for the whips and starts board was something I've already finished. I think it was um, the whip I have that's don't leave classified documents in the bathroom one, from Snarky Cross Stitch. I'll put it on the screen. You'll know what I'm talking about. But yeah, so I have that. I guess it's still like a lot of plans. I'm totally giving myself permission to like not do any of the whip go things if other things get in the way. And I'm still not really sure what I'm doing for next year's WIPCO. So there's like so many things that I want to start, but I also know that I'm overwhelmed with the number of whips I have right now. And maybe once I figure out like what things I'm going to send out, it will be easier to figure out what I'm doing for next year. So I like the idea of finishing things that I'm going to be giving away. But I don't know if I want to do 25 ornaments again, or I mean, some of them aren't ornaments, but 25 Christmas things. So I had initially started making a 2026 whip go board that was holidays, and so it included all of the ornaments I haven't completed yet, and then maybe one or two other Christmas things, but then all of the other empty spaces were filled with Halloween-y kind of things, because I have a lot of those kind of patterns I would like to start. And so then it would give me like a bunch of things to choose from in October. And similarly with the Whips and Starts board, I have made a new one that includes things that were on the board I haven't finished, and then replaces the things I finished with new starts that I really want to do. But every time I look at it, I'm like, oh, but it's missing this one that I want to start. So I don't know. I might do something where I like keep it to whips so that I can actually finish things, and then like give myself a prize of starting something new if I finish however many things. I don't know. I can't decide. It's like I really enjoy starting new things, but I don't enjoy knowing there's so many projects that have like a lot of stitches remaining before I will be anywhere near finish. So, yeah. One thing I did think about potentially for next year, because obviously I can't do it in the next month, is to take the bookmark patterns that I have and make a bookmark and then put it in a book that I sent to someone. I realized when I sent books to everyone, I can't remember what year it was now, that not all of my people I gift actually do a lot of reading, and so like some of the books I felt like kind of bad later because it was like, oh, I don't think this person's gonna actually read it, because they just aren't like a person that enjoys doing a lot of reading. So I'll have to selectively decide who would get a bookmark in a book, based on who would actually like it. But yeah, because there's this Spellbound Stitches series that just came out, which is it's like a group of designers and they all designed bookmarks, and then and it has like quite a lot of designers. There's a bunch I don't know, and then there's definitely ones by Boomerang Stitches and Sprouting Lupine, and yeah, definitely a lot more than that. I think there's like 15, something like that. There's a lot of bookmarks, and it was the sort of thing where you donate at least $15 to one of several humanitarian organizations, and then you send your receipt to them, and then they send you like a PDF, or you know, a folder of PDFs for this. So yeah, and then there's like some bookmarks that I have already made but not fully finished, and there's some bookmarks that like Shaded Stitchery has uh, some really cool like sci-fi looking bookmarks that I think maybe were part of Spellbound Stitches before, but now have been released on her website. And she has a Black Friday sale coming up. So um, if you like Shaded Stitchery and you haven't looked at that, and it's still before Monday the 1st, I think, then you should definitely check it out. I know also next year I'm going to be starting the Data Portraits in Paris part deux or two. Um, so, um, but yeah, so like there's a lot going on, but I give myself permission to like rearrange my goals and plans based on just making sure I don't completely stress out about, um, you know, the holidays. Um, so yeah, I have some haul. I'm gonna pause for a second so I can get some of that set up, but I'll be back with that. Okay, so not a huge amount of cross stitch haul, but I did just randomly catch um, a live sale on YouTube that Sammy J Stitches, who came up with the cross stitch Monopoly game, and then also um, has a shop that I actually didn't know was her shop called the Tiny Hummingbird Stitchery. She sale that was like, here's a bunch of stuff that I have in my stock, um, and am ready to send it out. So um, I got two pieces of fabric from her. Um, the first one is this 36 count linen in the colorway True Blue. Okay, editing Betsy in here. I my sound cut off, so I'm showing you the linen I got from Sammy J and True Blue by Fox and Rabbit, and I think that I'm telling you that I have never used their fabric before. So it's a really nice deep blue that I'm looking at, and I excited to try it out. I also got an 18 count piece of terracotta by Atomic Ranch Fabrics. So it's sort of like a orangey brown color. And I'm not sure if I'd use their fabric either. I think that's what I'm saying here. And then I also got one skein of thread, which was this beautiful blue classic colorwork called Summer Sky. And I'm a little disappointed with myself because I cut it as I was opening the package, but I think I can still use it just fine. So you can see there where I cut it. Um, but yeah, not too bad. And then I also got my floss stick from the Fat Quarter Shop. And so I'm showing you that here. It looks like getting it together. Um, the first color is River Rock, kind of a dark gray with some like brownish. And then Rosy Glow. It's like a very light pink. Um, then we had a Rose Petal, which is a little darker. and then maybe slightly more orange. So really beautiful pink. Roasted chestnut, which I used in Happy Christmas to All, sort of a orangey brown. And then that one is called Rod and Reel, and it's sort of like a brown, gray, shimmery looking like maybe the side of a fish scale. Um, and then root beer float is kind of like an orangey light brown. Uh, And I think that's it for cross stitch haul. Um, I did get quite a bit of yarn recently because Knit Picks was having a sale where a lot of their yarns were only $2 a skein. So I went a little overboard. And I'm about to show you that here. So um, I have no idea what I'm saying here. um, so the first thing is a plan I have that doesn't have any potential start date yet, but it's for the Alpine Bloom sweater by Caitlin Hunter. And this it uses the Sandscapes Adrift is the orange and white and pink one. And then that one is Opal Heather. So sort of like dark blue opaly color. I plan to use that one as the main color and the lighter color as the color work. Um, and so they're both 100% wool, but one of them is superwash. So um, might have to do a swatch to make sure the textures are similar enough for it to look okay. Um, but it seemed like a good combination of colors. And then I think I'm just showing you how it looks like maybe they're slightly different texture. I don't know if that's about how the yarn was spun or what exactly. It seemed like people had done that before and it turned out okay though when I was looking on Ravelry. So the darker color is the main color and the lighter color is the color work. And then I I'm looking about making this dolman sweater. It's kind of like really baggy in the armpits. Um, and then it's a little bit off the shoulder and the picture shows it in like an ombre. And so I picked up this is a worsted weight sweater, a dolman sweater. Um, And so I picked up some wool of the Andes from Knit Picks. Again, this was on super good deal. Um, so I'm showing you the colors here. So I believe it's Mineral Heather, Icicle Heather, and Wonderland Heather. Um, but yeah, I plan on the darker color being at the bottom and then moving into Icicle. And then after that, moving into Wonderland for the part that's over my upper chest. Um, so yeah, again, I don't know when I'm going to start this, but I figured it was a good time to get a wetter quantity of uh, yarn. Those are all superwash as well, 100% wool. Um, and then I got a bunch more of this pellet yarn, which is similar to the dark blue color, but I got a bunch in that pink color, which is called Blossom Heather, and then a couple different colors that could be used as accents. So this green is called edamame. Um, and the orange, I'm not sure what the name of the orange is, but I'm trying to get it to show the real color because it's showing as like darker and brighter than it is. It's a lot more muted orange. Um, and then like, but the green looks true. Um, so um, those are those. Again, I don't know what I'm going to do with them, but I just figured they're really beautiful colors and they would look good together if I decide to use the orange or the green as an accent or both. Um, so that's those. Those are, again, fingering weight, 100% wool, but not superwash. Um, so, yeah. I do really want to get my other yarn projects done before I get started on any of those, but I just couldn't resist the sale. Um, okay, I'm back. It's a few days later, and I just figured I would film this quick book section, um, hopefully quick. I read a lot of books since the last time I talked about books on this channel. Um, so I'll try not to go on too many tangents about all the things, um, but yeah, let's talk a little bit about the books I've been reading. So recently, I feel like I don't know if I'm being influenced by Julie, Kansas City girl in the Colorado world who talks about romance a lot, or it's just that time of year, or what exactly. But I've been um, reading a lot of romantasy and uh, a little like just straight romance, and then like things that are a little more fantasy but have a romantic element in them. So um, that's some of what you'll hear about. Some of them are a little different than that. So first, I think the last time we talked, I had mentioned I'd been reading Chloe Lisa, um, her books in the Bergman Brothers series. They're like a big Swedish family, and each of the books deals with a different siblings romance story. Um, so I had read 1 through 4 before, and then in the last several weeks, I guess it's now been probably like 2 months now, I read number 5, Everything for You, which is the only same sex couple. Um, and number six, um, I'll talk about in a second. So, number five, um, again, most of the people in this family are in sports. So, um, this is another sports related romance. They're both in um, a soccer team. The Oliver Bergman, who is in the family that surrounds the series, is a young rising star, and um, the the love interest is someone who was a star and is now like leaning towards retirement. Um, the character kind of reminds me of Ted Lasso. Yeah. So the character in the Ted Lasso show, who is like someone who was really famous for a long time, but is getting a little older. Of course, to be old in soccer is still to be pretty young. So uh, it doesn't seem weird that there is an age difference for sure. Um, and it's sort of like an enemies to lovers situation. And definitely like I don't know. This like these stories are there's enough like conflict for it to be interesting, but everyone is kind of like held really carefully and with love. So there's not too much like um, you know abusive or negative behaviors that happen um, in these books. So they're just they're sort of feel good and but also not like completely out of the range of possibility. Like, there are conflicts that are mostly within the individual characters, I think. Um, and so that was that one. I also read number six, which has Ziggy, the youngest sister in the Bergman brothers family. Um, and she's also the youngest player on the national women's sports team, so she's very talented in sports also. Um, and um, she's autistic and she has challenges with relationships that are apparent, but also it's like she's moving into adulthood, and so um, there's a lot of like feeling like she was always the baby and everyone treats her like she's younger than she is, and maybe part of that is just the way that neurodivergent people sometimes appear younger um, because of the ways that they interact. And um, and yeah, and then it's sort of like she starts hanging out with this like more bad boy character who I think plays soccer. Oh no, hockey. He plays hockey. Um, and they're sort of like initially in it to like sort of help each other's reputation. So for her to look like more like an adult, older, and like capable, and for him to look a little bit nicer and less of a bad boy, um, and so yeah, it's a cute story. Definitely, um, one of those like where you sort of like I don't know if they're actually gonna have any kind of positive interaction, but then like eventually it builds over time. So that was that one. And then Um, I also read the second Crimson Moth book, which I think I told you about. The first one was uh, the Crimson Moth or Heartless Hunter, depending on where in the world you got your copy. Rebel Witch was the following one. This is romantasy. The world is sort of like witches and witch hunters, and witches were in power, but then there was a revolution, and now being a witch is illegal. And then there's a romance between a witch and a witch hunter, and there was like a big falling out at the end of the last one, and so there's like a lot of will she, won't she, will he, won't he, kind of back and forth, in addition to the like sort of building out of the culture of witches and witch hunters, and sort of, I guess, looking at both groups not being as black and white as either of them have thought. And so, there are people in both groups who have bad intentions, and people in both groups who have good intentions. But yeah, I thought it was pretty good. It's been a while since I read that one. But I definitely appreciated it, and it has some like spicy scenes in it, which is nice. um, then let's see. Moving into the real world, I read The Leftover Woman by Jean Kwok. And this one, I'm not sure if someone recommended it to me or it was on a list somewhere, but I just like kept getting it off hold and then like putting it off. And but I found it really interesting. It was sort of like the story of these two women, and one of them grew up in rural China, and so there's a lot about her like cultural heritage and like what was expected of her as a woman, and like how she had an arranged marriage, and then she arrives in New York City having like sort of escaped that life, but not being fully sure how she's going to create this new life for herself. And this other woman is, I believe, a white woman who has adopted the first woman's daughter, not knowing it was her daughter or anything, but sort of having these feelings of not knowing if she's enough for her daughter who has Chinese heritage, and like her husband is like really academically interested in China and like has a lot of background. They're both authors, and there's just sort of like this conflicts in the lives of these two women, and then they come together, and yeah, there's definitely like this element of what it's like to be a Chinese immigrant, and or just like an immigrant in general, and like how one survives in New York City as an immigrant. And then there's also like, even for women who are more well off, like there are challenges with surviving in the career world, and um, balancing kind of their familial responsibilities versus their career responsibilities and those being in conflict. So yeah, I really enjoyed it. Um, Sometimes I felt like the voice was a little bit like it felt like younger than the two women actually were or something, but I think that was probably one of my only complaints. It did take me a little while to get into it and to figure out like how these two women were related and why we were hearing both of these stories like in parallel. Um, but I also feel like there's plenty of novels that are like that that lots of people like, but I have trouble like tracking, so it could just be that. Um, then um, How We Learn to Be Brave um, by Reverend Marian Edgar Buddy. Um, I am not a super religious person, but I do always find like stories of faith and like decision making and leadership as like interesting. Um, like I consider myself a spiritual person, but not a religious person, I guess. And so this was going through different like decisive moments in her life. She's the bishop of the Episcopal Diocese in Washington, D.C. So she, I believe, was the bishop of the um, church that Trump stood in front of with the Bible upside down on that one day. Um, just so she's been in the news and like saying things about things in DC. And there's been like, times where she was giving a sermon that different politicians were in attendance to. She, I believe, now works at the Washington Cathedral. Um, and yeah, so I mean, it was a lot about like making decisions and deciding when to stay and when to go, and like um, both like in terms of career moves and like when to be brave and when to accept other people's opinions. And I listened to this as an audiobook and I found her very likable and like thoughtful. Um, so yeah, I would recommend it. It's definitely not like uh, preachy, I didn't think. It was more like bringing together all of these different stories that is kind of like the way that a really good like preacher will bring together stories, but it wasn't like leading you towards like a particular faith or um, anything other than like how to make moral decisions when they're challenging. Um, so I read that one. And then another nonfiction book I read was How to Lose Your Mother by Molly Jong Fast. And she's someone that I have followed a little bit. She sometimes does political commentary. But I had not realized that her mother is the author, Erica Zhang, um, who wrote Fear of Flying, I believe is the name of it. Um, and so this was a story I heard about in an interview somewhere about basically like what it was like to grow up with her mother and her father, who were both um, big drinkers and also just like very interested in um, being famous and being rich and um, chasing that sort of like space in society. And then also how her mother was like very beloved, but their relationship wasn't always that good. And I think a lot of mothers and daughters have some of that going on, where there are conflicts that are just related to the fact that you're mother and daughter, um, and that the person that someone is for their child is often different than the person that they are for their friends or like people they interact with in society. Um, but I think because her mother was an alcoholic um, and more like obsessive about like being well known and things, she did a lot of things that were like very embarrassing. Like she would tell like very specific stories about her daughter in public and um, not really understand why that might not be received well by her daughter. And then her mother is also going through the like. There's also the story of her mother going into dementia and having to go to um, long-term care facility, um, and that kind of feeling of like um, unresolved loss of like things you wanted to say to your parent that maybe you can't say anymore because they're not like in a place to receive it as far as like their mental capacity. And I know like my father went through that with his mother's dementia, and there's definitely been times when I have thought about like, oh, my parents are aging, these things that I may have like held inside or like kept as a secret, like do I really want to keep them as secrets from my parents now, knowing that at some point I won't be able to tell them. um so it was just thoughtful um and interesting. I think I, as much as I don't like ascribe to the whole like fame as something that one should strive for, I find it really fascinating. And so stories that involve people who are like big in music or big in Hollywood or whatever are always sort of interesting to me. Maybe partially just because their like experience of the world is really different based on being so well known. Um, so that was that one. Um, I also read The Final Strife by Sarah El Arifi. Um, and this is the first of several books in this series, but I don't think I was able to get the other ones. But it's an interesting story. There's sort of like a caste system where um, the upper class has like certain like they can be determined by their blood color, and the upper class is able to use their blood to create magic. Um, and then there's like sort of a middle lower and then a lower that's more like the servant class that has clear blood. Um, and it's sort of like uh, this girl who's raised in the like lower middle class but is actually from the upper class. Um, sort of like sneaking into that world, and um and there's some like, overthrow the system energy, but also her like getting to know what this world is like compared to the one that she grew up in. Um, and yeah, I thought it was really good. I enjoyed how there were certain elements of the society that were like represented in a certain way, like the servant class couldn't speak, and so they had to sign, and um, there's a sort of like she knows how to sign, but like lots of people in her sort of lower middle area don't ever learn to sign with the class that's lower than them because they feel like it's below them or whatever. So there's sort of like an element of disability that goes with being part of this lower class. Um, and there's, um, yeah, just like a lot of, uh, like looking at the class society in this culture, and like ways of like breaking down those barriers, and and then there's always sort of like people who are part of the upper class who, once they're like known by the people in the lower class, are thought like, oh, that person definitely does not deserve to be there. So um, yeah, I thought it was definitely like interesting, and the interaction between her and the girl who grew up in the upper class that she was replaced with at birth, is super interesting, and they both sort of know that they're not in the place that they were born, um, and so um, yeah, it's just had like mystery elements, and different, like the the underground like criminal element giving you one story, but then it turns out not to be true, and they ask you to do something that they say is for one reason, but actually it's for another reason. um, and just sort of like that constant unraveling of the mystery um, was pleasurable. I also read the What the River Knows and Where the Library Hides by Isabel Ibanez. And I want to say this was also sort of like a mystery romance type situation. It's almost entirely based in Egypt, but the main character is like grew up in Argentina, and her parents used to spend at least half the year in Egypt doing um, archaeology, but never wanted to bring her. And then she hears that they've died, and so she says, I'm going, and no one can stop me. And so um, and this is like in the early 20th century. So there's a lot of like the interactions of the British with the Egyptians, and the ways that certain artifacts are um,
handled improperly by British authorities, and um, there are some magical elements, and there's a lot of just like weird mystery, and the love interest is sort of like someone she's never sure in either book if they're like an enemy or they're her ally. um, and so it just had this really interesting um, just way of looking at being in Egypt. I feel like recently I am not someone who's super into Egyptologists. I often feel like uh, that sort of genre has often like stolen cultural artifacts from people who they really belong to and given them to empire and things like that. And so it was nice to get the perspective coming from an outside non-empire culture of that going on, because there's definitely like some criticism of that, but also like the elements that are impossible to change, and like how some people sort of support that negative intentioned action, and some who um, fight a little harder against it. And again, it has a lot of characters that are like maybe they're your ally, but maybe they're not your ally. And um, I'm not sure I would say that it was like quite like it kind of reminded me of a gothic story as well, even though it wasn't quite that. Um, but just the elements of like you sort of know something spooky or bad is happening, but you're not quite sure what it is, and it's unraveled piece by piece. Um, so yeah, and then there's just like interesting like um, sort of uses of Egyptian like history within the story and with the magic, and like Cleopatra is involved, and like what happens when you discover someone's tomb um, in this like weird like culture where people rob from places like that. And um, yeah, so I guess it was more interesting than I was like when I first started reading it. I thought, oh, is this going to be like just really like pro Egyptologists, like, or Indiana Jones, like that kind of thing. But it was a lot more nuanced than that. And there was like travel down the Nile and different interesting places that they were going, and like being in Cairo versus being in Alexandria versus being further down the Nile, into where some of the ruins were. Um, so yeah, I thought those were um, super um, just an interesting voice. I did sometimes feel like the main character sounded a lot younger than maybe she should be, but uh but yeah, I don't know. I mean, she was also quite sheltered and like didn't know anything about what her parents were doing in Egypt, so maybe that's just normal for the story. Um yeah, and then I also read The Starling House by Alex E. Harrow. And again, this one was a lot more like a gothic romance. There's sort of like the town that they all grew up in, and there's like spooky things that have to do with the mines, and there's a spooky house called the Starling House. Um, that no one really like knows what goes on there, and there's an heir to the Starling house who shows up, um, but like no one ever sees him, and there's like a spooky book that was written like I don't know 100 years ago that talks about monsters that seems to somehow be related to the Starling house and the small town that they live in, and there's people disappearing, um, and it's always sort of like you think it's the most obvious answer why these things are happening, but then there's like a little bit of a twist, so it's not quite so obvious. And it eventually delves into like magic and um, the paranormal. So, um, yeah. And then there's sort of like this part of it that's about like small towns and the secrets that people keep and that later come out and um, cause problems or don't cause problems. So, yeah, I think that one also has a second book that I haven't read. Um, but yeah, it's deliciously spooky and um, sort of like melancholy, but interesting. I imagine a lot of fog around it, if that makes sense. Um, I also read, well, I started the audiobook of Entangled Life by Merlin Sheldrake. Um, so that one was super interesting. I also feel like the the author being the narrator of the audiobook was lovely. Um, he just spoke in such a way that really brought the book to life. I feel like it was sort of it's about fungi, mushrooms, and how like it talks about different ways that mushrooms are involved in the ecosystem, and like there's this whole part about hunting truffles, um, and but I think like the biggest thing I got out of it was just the idea that it like breaks down these like very defined ways that we think about biology and reproduction, because um, that's just not the way that mushrooms grow. um, and so there's like, there's any number of like sexes that could be in the mushroom, and the ways that they interact with other mushrooms and other plants is like sometimes symbiotic and sometimes like more um, of a conflict, or like um, and it just like really like turned upside down my some of my ideas around biology and like um, uh, evolution, and it really like is written almost like it's a literary work, but it also has lots of science and like research in it. So it was just lovely, and I could listen to this guy talk about mushrooms for hours. Obviously, I did, but I'm still waiting for it to come back off hold because I didn't finish it. Um, but I heard about that one from Michelle Bendy Stitchy, and I'm really glad I checked it out. So looking forward to finishing that one. I also read the Fourth Wing series, which I know a lot of people have read. Um, but it's a romantasy, and it starts off with them going to school to become dragon riders, and sort of like I think there's multiple things you can go to school for, and one of them is the riders, and one of them is the scribes that, like, you know, keep the history, write the history, like, um, record and interpret facts. And then there's like healers, and I'm not sure. There's maybe a fourth one that there's a school for, and the main character spends her whole life like thinking she's going to be a scribe and like studying for that, and then sort of at the last minute her mother, who is a general, says no, you're going to be a writer. And um and they have to go through all of these like physical challenges, and like you have to get bonded by a dragon. It's up to the dragon, it's not up to you. um and like a lot of people die going through even the process to become a writer. um and so there's sort of like a magical university element to it. um and then um and then there's like another sort of like enemies to lovers situation going on. um but yeah, just a really like fun world to be in. There's a lot of like the dragons don't answer to the humans, so like they have their own like culture and like um ways of decision making, um that's separate from whatever the humans decide. um so they're not like beasts of burden, they're like partners with the riders. So that's interesting. um and yeah, it was just super enjoyable, like dragons and like um definitely like there's a lot of like war and empire and like um what uh like when does the empire protect itself at the expense of the people outside of the empire. Those kind of things that come up in a lot of books like this, I think. But yeah, really well done. I was like kind of waiting to not enjoy these books because they were so hyped, but I really liked them. I read all three of them. If there were more, I would read more. Um, so that was good. At the same time, or a very similar time frame, I was also listening to, or I was also reading a 2025 book by Neon Yang, who wrote The Red Threads of Heaven and The Black Tides of something. I don't know. I read both of those books recently. Um, they also had dragons. Um, and the author is non-binary, and there's a like sort of there's a Asian cultural influence. They might be from Singapore, if I'm remembering correctly. Um, but this book was also really good, not related to those other books, but sort of like uh, a woman warrior, and then um, she gets sent to this other like region or country where uh, she's supposed to like figure out if there are actually still dragons there because she's a dragon hunter. um, but it ends up taking her into like a different culture and like new friendships, and just like outside of this whole image that she had to create for herself when she was sent to school to be a dragon hunter. And um, yeah, it was really like beautiful, like cultural elements, and um, like there's a twist at the end that you're almost expecting, but you're not sure. Um, and yeah, so that was Brighter Than Scale, Swifter Than Flame by Neon Yang. Um, then I read Oathbound by Tracy Dion, which I had read the other two books before this in the series. Um, and I think I like this one better than the first two books. Um, Again, it had a lot more like creating of nuance. I guess sort of like um, a Court of Thorns and Roses has this sort of where like the first book is a very like black and white, like this person is good and this person is bad, and then the further you get into it, like the more nuanced things become. And I felt like that was true with this as well. The sort of um, like someone who has various powers and um, dealing with like magical academia, but also like magical um, like descendants of slaves, and saw like in Northern California area, or sorry, California, North Carolina, and like South Carolina area, um, and then like there are definitely like people who have magic that are considered to be like bad by the other side, but whether they're actually bad is like not as clear. Like I said, there's like a lot more nuance in this one. Um, and the main character is like a young black woman um, who has ties to like a lot of different elements that are in conflict, um, and I feel like that makes it interesting. Um, so I don't want to give too much away, but I would definitely recommend that series. And that last book came out in 2025, um, as did the Neon Yang one. And then the last one that came out this year that I read was The Devil Three Times by Ricky Fain. And I think this was really well received by critics. I listened to the audiobook, and it was like a slow burn. At the beginning, I was kind of confused about what was happening, and then by the end, I was super invested. So, um, but it's basically like um, goes through 8 generations of a black family in West Tennessee as they are repeatedly visited by the devil. So it's like different families, and it starts with their original ancestor that was brought from in a slave ship to the United States. Um, and there's like elements of magic, and like different members of the family can see ghosts, or some of them can see multiple ghosts, some of them can only see a specific like close to them ghost, and like the devil appears in various things. And one of the things I really like about this is that the devil isn't like a um, again, it's nuance. So like the devil isn't like a universally bad influence, um, and like sometimes he comes to save them from things, and other times it seems like whatever he's up to is no good. Um, and then there's like sort of like reference to his brother and his father, and like being cast out of heaven and those kinds of things. Um, but a lot of it is also just like the different generations of this family, and like how some of them are perceived as black and some are perceived as white, and then there's a certain point in the history where like they don't actually know that they're related. They know they have the same last name, but they assume maybe it's just because like some of them were slaves of the white family, but actually they're related. um, and um, yeah, so just really interesting, like story, um, that again, like I said, has some magical elements that definitely like keep me interested, and some historical elements that are like just relevant to like whatever time frame. Each section will say like this person lived from this time, this year to this year, so you know like sort of where you are in U.S. cultural history. And yeah, um, definitely recommend that book. And I guess this is the author's debut book, so uh, would definitely read other things by this author. So I think those are all of the books that I read. Like I said, it was a lot, um, but I just wanted to make sure I got those. I was thinking that maybe in the end of the year I might do something like top 10 books I read, or thinking about whether I want to do a whip parade or a finish parade. If you're still here and you have opinions, please feel free to tell me which kinds of like extras you would be interested in. I also have like how I track my temperature cross stitch in the works. So yeah, I think that's all I have for today. So thanks for listening. If you're still here, leave me a comment. Let me know what you're working on, what you're reading, if you're knitting, if you're stitching, if you're crocheting, if you're thinking about what of your crafts you're going to give away for Christmas gifts. I'm super interested. Definitely like and subscribe if you want to see more of me. Um, and I will see you next time. Bye.